So it seems politic to once again delve into history and to uncover a lot of the atavistic forces that are at work here in the UK to make what seems like a degrading and deteriorating social fabric worse and worse by the day. The UK popularised in the 1970s, I think, a term called the Nanny state, whereby it was insinuated that you were under the control of a government who was intent on more or less henpecking and interfering, perhaps is the best way to put it, in your life. They could dictate what you could and could not do, rather than allowing governance to be a reflection of the public's wills. It was more, you elect us as your schoolmasters to boss you around. So Thatcher here put it very clearly in terms of how she thought the idea of governance should be less nanny state, more social and personal ownership on the atomistic private level. She went on to say that we should not expect the state to appear in the guise of an extravagant good fairy at christening, a loquacious companion at every stage of life's journey, and the unknown mourner at every funeral. It was her intention to basically, you could say, liberalise, and this was very neoliberalism in the 1980s, the United Kingdom away from state monopolies and ownership into more private and individualist policies. Her success here was mixed and varied, and obviously she's a controversial figure with strong opinions on both sides, but nevertheless, despite her transgressions, I think in general had the right thematic or philosophical approach to what you might say a maturity of governance, and that we can accept that people are flawed but will tend to behave in positive rather than negative ways. The counterpoint to this, you might say, is that the institution of several legislative and public order acts were instituted from 1986 and amended further and further onwards to this day and age, whereby we are now perceiving the fruit of that in at least one way in how much public discourse has been inhibited by the UK government, in that if you express your opinions on almost any topic that can be deemed insulting, you may have a visit from the police, and in worst case scenario find custodial imprisonment to be your deserts, just or otherwise. So here we will start by having a look at the cabinet and looking at what is a very nanny cabinet, and if you understand the behaviors of someone prior to being elected, you can understand the way that they will choose to exert their power. In this instance, most of these people are either mid-level feminized managers and or lawyers who are obsessed with rules, laws and dictates, and so with that we can just fairly comfortably understand that the understood political management of the UK will be down to what a middle manager in a corporation would do, which is to say you will follow the orders, do what you're told, and ask very few questions. And we can see that from an economic side. I've shown here just the decrease in economic freedom, so the ability for you to go out and establish yourself and be your own boss, and the way that you can understand the government's interaction on your behalf with the international economy. So this comes down to trade deals, it can come down to whether or not you're able to import and export without taxes, as well as set up private companies and how that does business. So there's a decrease, and a material here decrease, in the economic freedoms of the UK, and it's particularly worrisome when you consider it amongst its peers, whereby everyone in either the EU or North America, first world countries in general, have this increase in economic freedoms where it's at least encouraged for you to be better off and pursue what would be a middle class lifestyle. The other thing you could think is legalistically around what it's required for you to behave like, and that freedom is a very much a liberty, and this is when we can discuss liberty. But there's a super interesting article I read just recently, where analyses is basically around the deterioration of liberty in the UK and in the West somewhat in general. But because America is actually quite an ardent leader in this realm of free speech, as we can see from their First Amendment, we understand that they will never institute, and have attempted to, but declined to approbate a amendment to the Constitution reflecting racial hatred in particular, which is obviously what the big contestation around the current movement is all about. The United States here prohibited the incitement to racial hatred because the word hatred is overboard and uncertain, and in those legal terms, it was said here by the judge presiding over that case that it's impossible to say when ill will becomes hatred or when unworthy, scurrilous or false statements become abuse. The United Kingdom uses the word insulting, which is more or less this subjective understanding that you're insulting me and that I should be able to understand when an insult is hurled at me and I'm invade, versus when you're casting aspersions to someone, your intuitive understanding is whether or not you're insulting them. These things are obviously very, say, incongruous, but there's no coherent and formal objective measurement to this. You can't sit there and say, yes, that was definitely an insult, because I know that the person who's been offended has the most objective truth around what was said to them and why. This is not understood by the UK government and formally rejected in terms of the sensibility of it, such that they were implementing or have implemented a racial hatred and insulting amendments to the Act, to the 1986 Order Act. And so we can see the comeuppance, you might call it here, where by every year you have had increasing charges laid, and this is specific to hate crimes. So either the UK has been festering, which is probably true, but that the levels of hate crimes have continued to rise to almost unforeseen levels, and to say that there have been 150,000 hate crimes in the UK has to warrant, I think, some serious speculation around either the measurement of what a hate crime is and whether the inability to be very sure and the credence behind an accusation, versus if you've actually got 150,000 hate crimes, there's something seriously wrong with your social intermingling and the respect people have for one another. So either way, if the law is written too strict and stringently, or if there's just that many people hating each other, you have something to fix here. And the clear response from the Starmer government is, we like this rule and we want to enforce it more strictly. Thus, I think you'll probably see a continuation of charges laid on hate crimes, and then going forward we have to then make the compromise probably on, if the law will not be changed then or challenged, then you'll need to do something about the instances, and clearly punishment is not working. You can continue to hand out harsh sentencing, but it is not deterring, as you can see here, people from committing what is deemed a hate crime. So there needs to be a fundamental change in the perception and reality here. And I'll leave you with one of the quotes from an article to say that the appeals, and this was directly related to why the Attorney General has not necessarily, well, is necessarily political, but also won't necessarily charge and pursue or persecute certain cases over others. And it's to say the appeal on the grounds there was no cause of action. Regardless of whether the complaint had any merit, the situation could be seen as a government protecting some racial groups while allowing others to be vilified with impunity. In practice, very few of the matters referred to the Attorney General have been prosecuted, which itself leads to accusations of political selectivity. The current Attorney General is a very good friend of Starmer, and they're, I think, barristers together. So you can obviously then understand there's going to be a, I don't want to call it a bias perhaps, but I think it's necessarily baked into a political position that if you are going to combine the legislature with the magistrate in a way that's allowing the state to oversee who and what gets persecution based on political lines, to the degree that the appointment is a political one, I think you're always going to be in this quagmire of it's my turn to be the oppressor versus an oppressed person, and that the moral and ethical complications will naturally arise. So I would say that the trend from a freedom and a liberty perspective is negative, and that you are hoping that things will get better. I have bad news for you.